Welcome to Let's Talk Dreams, where your dreams take center stage. It's really about us doing, responding effectively with our abilities to maximize success. And the wonderful thing about our success is it may look different to each and every one of us, but we get an opportunity to grow together. I am your host, Dr. Carla Franklin, and I am excited about you being here with us on today. We have a special guest today, Meghann Simpson, who is actually my sister, and I met her at the Woman Evolve, right? And so it's just an opportunity for us to continue to grow and to continue to impact the lives of others. And I am excited that you're here today, and we're going to delve into a conversation about domestic violence, human trafficking, and mental health awareness. So please, audience, help me welcome Meghann to our podcast on today. Meghann, you are our special guest, and we are so thankful that you are here on today.
Thank you. Thank you, Carla. I'm so happy to be here. This is a great opportunity. And, I'm thrilled to just have the opportunity to share my story, to raise more awareness, hopefully my story touches the hearts of other people who have survived these types of traumas. And like what I really want our listeners to take away from today is that healing is 100% possible. The trauma that you have gone through, the challenges it has brought, that is very valid. But, with God, with healing, with services, we're going to get through this. You can find healing. And I really want our listeners to take that away with them today.
Awesome. Healing is possible. And this is an opportunity for us to create this platform and this safe space so that if you are in need of healing, your healing can begin on today. And so, Meghann, please share with our listeners your personal story so that they get an understanding of what it is that we're talking about today. Because if I had to put a title to it, it would really be Breaking the Silence.
Yes, I love that, breaking the silence. So my experience begins when I was about 5 years old.
Mm-hmm.
I started being sexually abused by a family member. At the time, I had no idea what was
Mm-hmm.
happening to me. I did not have any concept of body boundaries or consent. This was very normal, and because it was coming from a family member,
Mm-hmm.
I really thought that that was okay. Um, and being sexually abused from such an early age and it continuing for several years
Mm-hmm.
really changed the way my brain thought and processed, and it changed my emotional capacity towards myself and towards others. This continued for several years. And victims of childhood sexual abuse are actually shown to have higher risk because they are more vulnerable to being sexually and physically abused by other individuals due
Mm-hmm.
to how that sexual abuse changes the brain processing, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, unfortunately, as I continued to age, as I, continued my young childhood and entered my teen years, I was still experiencing sexual abuse, and
Wow.
other people saw that I was vulnerable to being taken advantage of, right? And unfortunately, there are some predators in our world who see these vulnerabilities and
Mm-hmm.
seek out someone who has those vulnerabilities to take advantage of. Um, and that was very difficult, and I continued to not know that what was happening to me was wrong.
Right.
It happened with more people, different dynamics, not just family members, but family friends,
Mm-hmm.
romantic partners, friends of my older siblings. And I truly grew up thinking that this was okay, this was normal.
Mm,
And a common theme of survivors of childhood sexual abuse is they start to associate love and affection and tolerance with abuse. And
wow.
unfortunately, my brain started to think that way. So it was my early teenage years where I started to learn that, this isn't quite right. Something is wrong here. These secrets, these ways I'm being treated. Like I started
Hmm.
to feel that something was wrong. Yet at the same time, I still didn't fully comprehend this was sexual abuse.
Hmm.
Um, I came forward to some family members about being abused, not by from everyone, but just from one individual, right?
Okay.
And I had mixed reactions. Some of my family members wanted to intervene, address this, pursue legal consequences, and advocate for me. Other family members didn't believe me. They dissuaded me from reporting. They, talked very negatively about me and my parents. And, that was very difficult, coming forward, not about everyone, but just one person abusing me and having such conflicting responses. And
Hmm.
that confused me,
Right.
right?
Hmm.
And I'm a preteen, I'm just entering my teenage years. I'm also experiencing that hormone boost, and we all know what that hormone boost does to us when we're in middle and high school. So
Yes.
I was so confused trying to understand all of that. Hmm.
Wow. And it just really thinks about why we're to be protected in our youth, to be taken advantage of without the understanding, just really can put us in a bad predicament. And so when we're thinking it's right, we don't have any defense, especially when people are making us to feel as if it really didn't happen to us. And so I'm saying us collectively, because I'm sure there are other people who have experienced the same trauma and felt the same way of not knowing how to respond or who to find that we can find trustworthy to help us in these predicaments and situations. So, what ultimately happened? What ultimate resource did you have? I know you began blogging, but is that really how you got your release or your support or help?
Yeah, so blogging came much, much later. Blogging became a coping skill as an adult, right?
Okay.
But as a teenager, I wrote a lot of poetry,
Okay.
right? Poetry was like a huge, huge coping skill for me as a teenager.
Mm-hmm.
I had notebooks upon notebooks of poems. I still have them throughout the years. I was fortunate that one of my parents did get me involved in clinical counseling,
Okay.
and that was very, very helpful, right? Clinical counseling, it's not for everyone. There are different perspectives of it, but for me, it was incredibly helpful. You
Mm-hmm.
know, but I kind of want to bring in aspects of the domestic violence. So, being at greater risk, not recognizing this when I entered romantic relationships as a late teenager, as a young adult,
Mm-hmm.
I experienced domestic violence. And one of the things I want to clarify with that is interpersonal violence. Domestic violence happens within the household, right? Interpersonal violence is violence or abuse between two people, but they don't live in the same household. So that was like my boyfriend or a partner being abusive towards me, even though we weren't living together. And then, when I had roommates later on, when I entered my early 20s and I had a roommate, I then experienced domestic violence in the household, not from a romantic partner, but from my roommate. And I still
Mm-hmm.
didn't fully understand that what was happening was abusive. And You mentioned blogging, so I want to bring that back to how that became a coping skill.
Hmm.
From poetry, I began to write stories, short stories, just expressing things, very reflective metaphors. I found a lot of safety and security in writing. So then now it's only this past year, I'm in my late 20s now where I've started to blog. And blogging for me became not just personal reflection, but also a resource for others.
Hmm.
Recognizing that there are so many people who have experienced these types of abuse and thinking that, like, they are struggling with healing. They're struggling to come to terms with it. They have different expectations of themselves that might not be realistic for healing,
Hmm.
right? So really through blogging, I wanted to share my healing experience to help give hope and inspiration and guidance to other people who were feeling and going through the same things that I had.
Thank you for sharing that. I know there's vulnerability attached with sharing your story. And it's just a learning experience for us because when you talk about, we hear a lot about domestic violence and the domestic experience that people have in the home, but it also is this interpersonal violence that you speak of where it's somebody that you have relationship with that are abusing you that don't necessarily live with you, and just really those dynamics have the same trauma. Would you agree?
Absolutely.
Hmm.
Yes, yes. And for understanding purposes, we often just use domestic violence. Everyone very much understands what that
Hmm.
means. The term interpersonal violence is something that I am really trying to raise more awareness of
Okay.
because we have teenagers in interpersonal violent relationships. Their boyfriend is verbally, physically, mentally abusive. We have girlfriends who are stalking and regulating and controlling their boyfriend's social media, friends, things like this financially, and our society doesn't quite understand how you can be in an abusive relationship without living in the same house. Or the different dynamics, like me
Hmm.
being abused by a roommate. We have no romantic or sexual relationship, yet there was 100% abuse in that household. And I think
Right.
it's really important because the trauma is the same. you
Right.
know like there are different aspects of when you're in a romantic relationship and you're being abused versus non-romantic, but it's still abuse, it's still violence, it's still a trauma, it's in the same category, and that's something that I think is really important for us as a society to become more aware of.
Yes. And as I said, again, thank you for expanding, our thought process and seeing that it's bigger than what we've probably thought or even imagined that people are experiencing. And maybe they're quiet about the challenges because of the fear of the unknown. What are some of the challenges outside of family not believing or dissuading us to share a different story to our experience? What are some of the challenges that you face during these periods of exploitation? Because it's advantage, taking advantage of really your innocence and purity.
Yes, yes. So there were a lot of different challenges, and there were different challenges when I was 8, 9 versus when I was 14, 15 versus when I was 22. But
Mm-hmm.
I would say the biggest challenge every time was a sense of shame and guilt and self-blame. Like, I stayed in this relationship, I pursued this person, I excused things, I never told them no. you know? But
Mhm.
when you're an adolescent, you cannot consent. You can't. So even
Mhm.
if you're like a teenager and you're not telling the person no, but the
Mhm.
person is like 19, 20, 21, that's still sexual abuse, and that was one of the relationships that I was
Mhm.
in. Was I was 15, this person was in their early 20s, and I thought, wow, a boyfriend, this older man,
Yeah.
ooh, but that was abuse. And then I blamed myself because I didn't tell them no, or
Mhm.
I thought that they loved me, or, I wanted things to work. And then as an adult in an abusive relationship with my roommate, like, I loved that person platonically. I
Mhm.
really wanted to figure out our problems. I didn't want to fight anymore. I didn't want them to be all upset with me for honestly ridiculous things that they were upset with me for. I
Mhm.
remember I actually said to them, like, hey, I want to go to counseling together and work this out. And when they refused, I blamed myself for not approaching them gently and compassionately enough.
Yeah.
Like it was my fault they said no. And a lot of survivors of sexual violence and domestic violence struggle with that sense of shame and
Mhm.
self-blame and guilt. Like somehow we must be responsible for the abusive actions of someone else. So that was a common challenge across the board that I really struggled with. And that's a mindset that
Mhm.
abusers use as a strategic way of targeting them. Like if they can get the victim to stay in that self-blame, self-guilt mindset,
Mhm.
then that just perpetuates being able to be taken
Abuse.
advantage of.
Mhm.
So that was a very big common challenge across all ages and dynamics. Another challenge was feeling like I deserved love, like I deserved safety. Like sometimes I thought that, oh, I must deserve this abuse because I did something wrong, or I lost my temper at one point, or I'm just not good enough. I'm not trying hard enough. Um, and that's really hard is, thinking that there's so much wrong with me. I don't deserve to be loved. I don't deserve grace and gentleness. I don't deserve someone who's going to spoil me.
Mhm.
So feeling like I didn't deserve healthy, compassionate, safe treatment was also a challenge. And that's again a mindset that, some victims get into because we haven't learned that we deserve love. We have people trying to teach us that we don't deserve those things. So, how do we combat that thought process? You know?
Wow. I'm sitting here thinking about these challenges because if you've ever felt shame, it almost becomes like your target for manipulation, and that would lead to abuse. And if you're the people pleasing type,
Mm.
you want to please everybody and you want to make sure that nobody is upset with you. And so you're taking on ownership to things that were never really yours from the beginning, so that I can't find a way out or find an escape route, because I think that it's something that I've done that created the situation. And
Right.
so it becomes a vicious cycle that when people ask, well, why didn't you leave? Where's
Right. And that statement is so harmful. Why
mm-hmm,
didn't I leave? Let's just say the abusive relationship I had with my roommate. I lived with them for over a year. Why didn't I leave when they were being violent, when I was being yelled at for eating too much pizza?
mm-hmm,
Why didn't I leave? Because I loved them,
mm-hmm,
because they would breadcrumb me with moments of affection and
mm-hmm,
care and
mm-hmm,
spoil me with different treats or gifts every now and again, because they convinced me that I financially would not be able to survive without them supporting me. You know,
Mm,
that I would be on the streets or in a shelter if I left them because I was not capable of doing things. You know, like when someone says, "Why didn't you leave?" What they should be saying is, "I see how hard it was for you to leave. I see how hard it was for you to overcome the mental manipulation that caused you to stay." Because it is. There's a lot of mental manipulation and also physical safety. If I
mhm,
leave, are they going to come at me? If I
mhm,
leave, are they going to engage in post separation abuse where now they're stalking me and at the end of my street, or they're following me, or they're sending me a lot of text messages, you know? So the risk of being abused does not end when you leave a relationship, it continues. And that's also a big risk factor, especially when the person abusing you is physically violent. The
okay,
risk is astronomical, you know. And one of the things you mentioned was that sense of like self-blame of I put myself in this situation, you know. And a lot of survivors think that, and they take responsibility for things that were not up to them,
mhm,
because who in their life has taught them you're not responsible for someone else's actions, you're not responsible for them mistreating you,
mhm,
you know. And that was something I had to learn is, hey, I ate too much pizza, big deal. I'm not responsible for them yelling at me. It's a pizza, you know.
yes, mhm,
Eh, oh, I parked, you know, we had 2 cars, their car and my car, and I forgot to park on the street the night before knowing they had to leave for work in the morning. Now you're waking me up and yelling at me and all of these things and swearing
yes,
because I forgot where to park the night before when I got home from work. You know,
yeah,
that's not my fault. I don't
yes,
deserve to be yelled at for that. Like, that's
mhm.
just ridiculous. And victims and survivors of violence need to take that responsibility and guilt and shame off them. You know, one of the last things I want to add to this is when someone is a victim of abuse from multiple individuals, they
Mhm.
start to think, what's wrong with me? What am
Yes.
I doing? Why am I being targeted by all these different people? There must be
Mhm.
something wrong with me. And I really want to challenge that, because it's not that there's something wrong with them. What it is that they have lots of vulnerabilities
Mhm.
that a predator sees and exploits that person's vulnerability. So there's nothing wrong with a victim who's being abused by multiple people. All it is that they have many vulnerabilities that predators seek out.
Wow, that's very strong tool to the survivor. And
Mhm.
if you're listening, please know Meghann is letting us know the tools and resources that first start in our minds to be able to help us to overcome some of these situations that we might have experienced. And if you didn't hear anything that was said so far, I want you to know that it is nothing wrong with you. Again, there is nothing wrong with you, and you don't have to take ownership or responsibility of someone else's behavior. And to the person who may not have experienced domestic abuse or sexual abuse, it's important for us to change our verbiage, is what you're saying. And
Absolutely.
you're giving us tools to say, hey, I see you. I have empathy for you. I understand. Let me help you. Let me listen and pause for a moment to see that, it's not always as easy as you think it is. when you are experiencing these type of situations, because again, like you mentioned, the abuse doesn't stop the moment you leave. There's the residual effect of what's next after this. And so,
Mhm.
if we're asking people to break their silence, we have to be sensitive to the needs that happen after this, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. And thank you for clarifying that, Carla, because it is very important for us to recognize that there are risk factors when someone leaves an abusive relationship, whether they're a teenager or an adult. There are absolutely risk factors. And also, even when the survivor is no longer being like abused directly,
Hmm.
mentally, they have PTSD or post-traumatic stress disorder. They might still be thinking those self-deprecating or self-hate mindsets that they started to think and feel when the abuse was happening. So it's not just leave. It's leave, find physical safety, find support, and have to mentally heal the mindsets that were developed when they were being abused.
Wonderful. So it's not just leaving, it's support and it's safety. These
Mhm.
are valid and valuable tools that are necessary for the survivor to continue to survive. And these are areas that are necessary for us to advocate on those behalves. And so, speak to the person who's looking for help. I know that you have broken the silence personally, and you are sharing as an advocate, as resources and tools to help the person or persons that are in need. Because sometimes it is the mother with children, right?
Mhm.
That, I'm not just looking out for my own safety, but I'm looking for the safety of my children. Speak to that person who's looking for help and the opportunities of advocacy that you have as a result of breaking your own personal silence.
Yeah, so for the person who is looking for help, start with one person that you not only feel physically safe with, mentally safe with, but you feel emotionally safe with. This person has consistently been a healthy, positive emotional support in your life.
Hmm.
And maybe you're not super close, but you know that if you go to them, they got your back, they got your
Hmm.
heart, you know, and that is the person that you want to confide in. You let them know, I'm struggling with this. There's some things happening that I'm really worried or concerned about. And it's okay to not know how to get out of a situation, how
Hmm.
to get help. It can be very complex and it's okay to not know. But the first step is reaching out to help, reaching out to someone, letting them know I need help and, I need support.
Hmm.
That's really valuable. Another thing is finding community resources. If you're a single mother, you're worried that if you leave an abusive relationship, your kids are going to be abused, something's going to happen to them, or you want the kids to, you don't want the kids to have the trauma of divorced parents or things like that. Like those are really, really valid. So find community resources. What shelters are available that accept kids? What resources are there for single parents? Are there healing resources for children to help them understand in an
Hmm.
age appropriate way what was happening in the household? Into the parents specifically, I want to say it is always better for your child to be removed from an abusive environment, even if they have split parents, than to stay in the abusive environment and the children continuously grow up being exposed to that.
Hmm.
And I really want parents to take that in. And I'm not saying it's easy whatsoever, but it is healthier for your child in the long term to have the challenge of separation versus growing up consistently witnessing abuse. Um, for other individuals, it can be find a support group. There are plenty of non-clinical peer support groups for survivors of sexual and domestic trauma.
Mm-hmm.
Like you can find those things. Clinical support therapy made a big difference for me, but I understand that's not for everyone. Some people have very different views on that, and that is okay. There are
Mm-hmm.
other resources. Another thing that was helpful for me was some holistic practices, you know, um, exercising, gentle exercises, knowing that I can feel safe in my body and I have control over my body. That
Mm-hmm.
brought me security. There was also my faith, my religious community, finding, healing in God's love, because sometimes predators will use scripture in an abusive way. Oh, you can't get a divorce because it's against the Bible. But guess what? It says in the Bible that God does not want his daughters abused. It says
Right.
that in the Bible. So, what comes first? Not getting a divorce or not being abused? I think God would want his daughters to be safe more so than he wants to avoid divorce.
Right.
And I think that's something really important to take in, because there's a difference between marital conflict and marital abuse. Very different.
Wow.
Um, Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I love that, marital conflict and marital abuse, there's a disparity in that. And oftentimes we put that together
Mhm.
as if no one has an out. And just knowing God wants what's best for us from a faith-based response. And then, no matter what it is, the church as a resource is more open today, I believe, than it was in the past of making people stay for the wrong reasons, as if divorce was the ultimate, taboo of the Christian faith. But, we want to make sure that we're providing the correct resources. I did attend last year. One of my friends had a domestic violence awareness conference, and I attended it just out of support. But there are so many people that are experiencing things, and one of the things that was shared was how important it is that the church, um, as dedicated as we are to faith and our relationship with God, sometimes we have to utilize the outside resources that will help a person to survive as well. So no, that was just something that was great that you shared.
Yeah, and I want to speak a little bit more on that when it comes to therapeutic services, whether it's clinical or non-clinical. In some faith-based communities, they say all you need is God. You don't need counseling, you don't need medication. And, we do need God. God can
Yes,
heal us tremendously, but I really feel that God has provided resources to help us heal. You
yes.
know, I don't think that it is a sin to heal through God and heal through a doctor who has the ability to support you. And I think a beautiful thing is Christian based therapists that can make a
Absolutely.
huge impact for those who might not want your clinical non-faith-based support. Find a Christian therapist that's going to not only heal you through God, but also heal you through the science that they learned in school to get that certification. And I think it's valuable for us of faith to kind of open ourselves up to recognizing that God has given us incredible resources to help
Hmm.
us in our healing journey.
Yes.
Yes, we can heal through Him, but there are also tools around us that He may make sure that are available for us to utilize.
Absolutely. I agree 100% on one of the things people say nowadays is um, faith plus therapy equals, something of value to the person who stands in need of it. So it's not that you don't need God, but He, like you said, provides these resources and tools to help the humanity side, that
Mhm.
of real issues that you're dealing with. And your faith is what's going to help you to overcome the obstacles of the shame, of the rejection, of the disappointment, of taking ownership to things that weren't your responsibility. But then there's going to be outside healing opportunities that the Lord will use, as in therapy, as in, groups and community that help support, the healing to bring you to, the expected end, which is that He has good thoughts towards you and of hope in the future that's prepared and bright.
Yes, absolutely.
Awesome. So share with us, I know that, a part of, your advocacy and your resources, that you linked up with another survivor, to be able to, share some growth and development. So share with us that.
Yeah, so I co-founded a nonprofit called Now She Speaks. I
Yeah.
co-founded it with my best friend Maggie. She
Mm-hmm.
is also a survivor of sexual assault, domestic violence, and human trafficking.
Mm-hmm.
Very, very different dynamics than myself, very different experiences, but still valid, still abuse. And we actually met in college in my before I was even 20, we met in college. So,
Mm-hmm.
we've been friends for about over 10 years now.
Awesome. Mm-hmm.
Um and we talked about our experiences. We talked about the different ways that we were healing. She
Mm-hmm.
never pursued clinical healing. That was a big thing for me. She got help through different resources than I did. And we came to this common place where we recognized there was a deficit in the services being provided. These
Okay.
providers were not trauma informed enough. They didn't have enough clarity. They weren't person centered enough. They weren't gentle enough. And unfortunately, just because someone is a provider in the health and human services field does not mean that they are healthy or effective, right? So that
Wow.
was one of the things that we noticed working in human services and the health field is that there are some providers who are simply lacking the necessary skills to give high quality care. On
Mm-hmm.
the other hand, the other motivator was we recognize that so many survivors of violence, not just women, but men too, have
Mm-hmm.
a lot of the same mental health and emotional health challenges where they don't believe that healing is possible, right? They don't believe that their future will ever change, that they'll be able to get out of this. So, with those both perspectives, with recognizing we have healed, we've
Mm-hmm.
worked to get out of these situations, we have made progress. We came together and were like, what if we had a nonprofit that demonstrated and modeled healing and recovery because we're peers, we're survivors, and provided advocacy and education to the providers giving support to current victims and survivors.
Mm-hmm.
So that kind of developed into Now She Speaks. There were a lot of conversations, we talked about it for 6 months to a year before we became official, right? It was a
Mm-hmm.
long, thorough process of development. And we've done several different things. We've kind of evolved and grown, and we have big plans, but God's time, and we're determined to keep working towards those. But
Mm-hmm.
right now, we're doing public speaking engagements just like this. We've attended different community events and, participated in news interviews. We also provide training and education to providers, but also community members, like doctors, hotel staff, because there's violence going on in these environments and they can witness and see the signs, but they don't know what they're seeing. So if we can give them the education to recognize that, we're going to have a larger community of people who are going to act and prevent or intervene when they see the signs of violence. And then also, we're providing technical assistance. So that is direct consultation and guidance to agencies who want someone who has experience to come in and speak on this. And one of the things that sets Now She Speaks apart, what sets Maggie, I, and our team apart, is we have that lived experience and that professional educational experience being health and human services workers and working in these different agencies and settings. So we have the best of both worlds to come together and say, I know what it's like to be a provider and
Mm-hmm.
going through these challenges, and I know what it's like to receive the services being provided, and I can identify the gaps. So that's really that's a very brief, perspective or explanation of how Now She Speaks came to be, some of our motivators, as well as what we're trying to do currently in the community.
Awesome. I hope as you're listening, tell our audience how they could get in contact with Now She Speaks.
Yeah, so you can Google us, nowshespeaks.org.
Mm-hmm.
Send us an email. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. You can reach out to us directly, send us a message, send us an email. We love to take requests. We're happy to collaborate. We will travel for different opportunities. We all located in New York State, but depending on the opportunity, we would love to travel, and we're more than willing to do virtual opportunities as well. You can reach out to us for the training aspect and consultation, for public speaking events, or also if you're a victim or a survivor and you're like, I don't know what to do. Where do I start? I need some help. I need someone who knows how to get through this. And we can have a conversation and give you some support and guidance and help you get this process started on your own healing journey.
Wonderful. I just want to say, May, thank you so much for being here with us on Let's Talk Dreams podcast. You have just been a wealth of information. And it's so important for us to know that, if you have been a victim, you don't have to remain silent in the situation that you've experienced. It is never your fault, and there are opportunities and resources available to help you. Now She Speaks is an opportunity, it's a platform so that you might have someone who has felt what you feel, who've experienced what you've experienced, and can identify the emotions, the feelings, the regret, the shame, all of those things that are a part of your journey. But there is, I say, glory after this, because there is no longer a need to remain silent. And so Maggie said, we act, we prevent, and we intervene. It might not be your experience personally, but you can be a resource of information to direct someone in the right way so that as they act, you can help prevent and intervene on someone's behalf so that as she reaches out, there is a community available to help, to support, and to love. I really hope that you've enjoyed this episode on today and you take the resources available. I will share the link and the podcast at the end of the podcast, but it is always my pleasure to spend this time with you, to share these moments and experiences so so that we can continue to evolve, we can continue to make a difference and maximize what success looks like to you. Sometimes it's just the ability just to breathe and make it through another day. That is a survival and that is success for someone. And so, if you've enjoyed this episode, I pray that you would consider subscribing. And even if you find interest on something that we may talk about, please share that with us, and we'll do our best to make sure that we're providing the resources necessary for you. Let's continue to dream. It will always be your dreams that happen sometimes in the darkest moments of your life that give vision, but we're going to make sure that we navigate towards success and maximize every opportunity that we have, and so that you can be who you endeavor and inspire to be. Thank you again for joining us on Let's Talk Dreams podcast. It has been our pleasure.